Ladies, gentlemen, and exiles of all ages, yesterday we had the big reveal stream from GGG about the upcoming major patch 0.1.1 for Path of Exile 2's early access, and surprising a lot of people, the devs essentially committed to not applying any major nerfs to the top builds until they are willing to do a full league reset at this point, the timing of which is currently not going to be set. This means we have at least a good while longer with the current sort of best builds that are existing right now, which means even more reason to talk about the builds that are at the sort of top of the pile of ridiculousness, the ones for each ascendancy that I've seen that I think just best represents their ability to do high damage, survive ridiculous situations, or just move through content ridiculously quickly enough to put it above the rest. And as usual for these style of videos, I will have the original creator for the build on screen when talking about it, and their channels will be linked below the video as well. Starting off then with the Titan, we have another default attack build for a warrior here. There have been a few variations of default mace strike warrior builds going around since launch of early access, mostly because the skill scales surprisingly well compared to a lot of other mace skills, and importantly it has no mana cost, and it's a free 6-link, which is a nice bonus too. This, however, lets you utilize it in ways that you simply can't with anything else properly because of the mana stuff. For the most part, this functions off of the Cultist Great Hammer weapon base, which makes strikes deal splash damage around the target's hit, which helps make your damage spread and chain from one enemy to the next for massive chain reactions when you slap them. This build also uses the Pole Cirkelm unique ring, which lets you shatter chilled enemies as if they were frozen, making it really easy to proc Herald of Ice on enemies if you have some flat cold damage baked into your build too, which is actually speeding up clear for Titans in this setup, as interesting as that is. It does as well use a sort of classic Hammer of the God setup for a single target, but the fact that it achieves its clear through Herald of Ice and an icy mace strike is pretty interesting to me. Moving on then, we have the Warbringer, and I am still quite big on this Shockwave Totem level stacking Warbringer build. This uses the Keystone that replaces mana cost with life cost to make up for the massive mana cost of a level 40 skill, and otherwise the main focus is very simply boosting the level and damage of Shockwave Totem, so you have a little portable cluster bomb essentially that you can leave on the ground, which compared to most melee ascendancy builds gives you a lot of freedom of movement to actually dodge attacks while the damage comes out of the totems themselves. Currently this seems to be doing what it is as a result of multiple snapshotting effects as well related to the ancestors and also the totems, because this lets you play around with weapon sets. You can summon the totems with 2 giant maces out for the maximum level increase, then swap to your other weapon set with a shield in between summons for defensive purposes, and the totems will still have the level boost as if you were using the other weapons. After that we have the Stormweaver, and of course Stormweaver has generally been dominated, but just by since launch, by various versions of Archmage focused mana stacking Arcane Surge pumping massive lightning damage machines, and a lot of them are focused on Spark as a method of applying this stack damage. Others get a bit more creative with it with things like Lightning Conduit added in for even more crazy boss damage. And the thing is, while I normally avoid talking about these same builds concept for multiple different classes, this one is just enough of a variation away from the Blood Mage version now that it's finally worth having a look at, which is the Temporalis unique body armor, which lowers all skill cooldowns by up to 4 seconds just flat, and Choir of the Storms, a unique amulet that causes a lightning bolt whenever you get a critical hit. Normally this has a low internal cooldown as well so that the lightning bolts can't proc themselves, but Temporalis makes it skip the cooldown, which lets the lightning bolts, when they critically hit, spawn more lightning bolts, which has crazy interactions and implications all in itself. But this player here has combined it with a multi-fortress frost wall slotted into cast on crit to trigger the first crit through Spark, which causes critical lightning bolts, which spawn frost walls that can then be hit by the lightning bolts themselves, which can be crits themselves to spawn more lightning bolts, so it spawns frost walls, and then you just get an infinite loop that will basically follow you around the map as you move of lightning bolt and frost wall doing tons and tons of damage. It is just a nutty setup, and while most players can only dream of owning Temporalis, it's quite the beautiful dream to live vicariously through watching others. Then we have Chronomancer, and I've had my eye on the same build from the same creator for a number of weeks now, and I still feel like every time I see it, it actually gets better and better. This is the Hammer of the Gods focused mace wielding Chronomancer build, taking heavy advantage of Chronomancer's ability to have an RNG chance of ignoring cooldowns, as well as the active ascendancy skill that manually resets cooldowns too, and using this to just absolutely spam Hammer of the Gods, which otherwise would be a single use high damage long cooldown skill. This build uses cold damage and Herald of Ice and the Pole Cirkelm unique ring for its actual clearing, similar to the Mace Strike warrior build, but the recent major change came to single target specifically, using the Trample Toe unique boots, which makes enemies explode for 30% of their overkill damage. However, this actually also applies to Shield Wall when you summon it, so if you make Shield Wall with the Fortress support to create a circle of walls, and if you summon this before using Hammer of the Gods, the skill will also damage the walls and overkill them, which explodes that damage onto the boss if you are focusing them in the middle of it, which just adds an extra multiplier, essentially, of damage for every single Hammer the Gods. Then using Chronomancer's Ascendancy nodes, you can use more Hammer the Gods, making sure to refresh your shield wall in between each cast to amplify the damage even further. Moving on, then we have the Witchhunter Ascendancy, which is still seemingly being dominated by Lightning Crossbow as a setup, played mostly around Galvanic Shards for a clearing skill that essentially fires chaining lightning bolts in a shotgun spread, combined with Plasma Burst for high burst damage and Shock Burst rounds for high sustained damage against any enemy that is afflicted with a lightning-based ailment such as shock or electrocute. This gets the damage it does by stat stacking int on top of the Hand of Wisdom and Action unique gloves, which scale int into flat bonus lightning damage and dexterity into bonus attack speed. Then the super duper high-end variation uses Temporalis and Blink for just an incredibly fast movement speed addition for maps. Temporalis reducing cooldowns by a flat number, and Blink having a short enough cooldown to have the CD completely removed by a good Temporalis. Everyone did expect the Hand of Wisdom and Action gloves to see a significant nerf as soon as possible, but with the developers actually holding off on major nerfs at least until a full league reset, I can happily say it's worth going out and making sure you get your gloves right now and have some fun with them while they last. Then we have Gemling Legionnaire, which has had one build stagnantly at the top for a while, at least in my opinion, which is the triple attribute stacker using the Hand of Wisdom and Action unique gloves that we just talked about, combined with the Pillar of the Caged God unique staff, which scales weapon damage from strength, attack speed off of dex, and area of effect off of intelligence. Then combines it with Astromentis as a unique amulet with a ton of just raw attributes on it, and just stacks the attributes to the moon and all the other places too, which when combining the scaling flat lightning damage from the gloves and the fact that Tempest Flurry as a quarterstaff skill essentially decides its movement and momentum speed while attacking based off of your attack speed rather than movement speed, and you can hold down the attack button to speedily fly through maps while popping things that aren't even visibly on your screen as you move, which just makes this setup absolutely nuts. Moving on to the Deadeye, I have great news. For the first time in a long time, Deadeye's strongest build uses a different core skill as its base, and it's actually just the auto attack for a bow. The main change going on here is because the Herald skills triggering each other are just so strong for AoE clearing, meaning using Herald of Ice to shock enemies and Herald of Thunder to freeze enemies, it's just so strong at chain murdering everything on the screen for clear-based content, so rather than using Lightning Arrow to proc it, which costs mana and takes investment and such, you can just get a bow with reasonably good flat cold damage, juice the hell out of projectile skill levels specifically to get literally like level 39 bow shot, use the auto attack, the literal bow shot attack, then when you fire it you will chill, freeze, and shatter enemies and do Herald of Ice explosions, which will trigger shocks and kill enemies to trigger Herald of Thunder, lightning bolts, which then freeze and shatter enemies, so on and so forth, and then you still keep the classic Lightning Rod and Orb of Storms interaction for bosses, which just absolutely melts them very, very quickly. After that we have the Pathfinder, and I'm back on the Poisonous Concoction train. The main thing limiting poison concoction before was flash charges over longer fights like pinnacle bosses, but that can be solved with the right gear surrounding it. This is a list of builds based on their high-end potential, so counting this setup without flash charge management problems, it is just absolutely absurd. For the Pathfinder, it does ridiculous single target damage, it breaks through maps just absolutely fine. For the most part, this ascendancy is at its strongest when doing poison due to some of its nodes that specifically synergize with poisons, but obviously pushing that further with Poisonous Concoction, which is a Pathfinder exclusive ascendancy skill too, makes this even more interesting and makes it have higher potential too. Following that, we have the Invoker, and generally speaking the best Invoker builds for a long time have been sort of dueling between lightning focused builds or cold focused builds, and at this point I think in a lot of situations cold builds are starting to come out on top, and this is mostly due to the strength again of the Herald skills and the combination of applying shock through Herald of Ice and chill or freeze through Herald of Thunder. This player uses that main interaction for the majority of the damage while mapping, but then when it turns to single target is where it gets a little bit more interesting. Part of their setup is using Cast on Critical as a meta skill to trigger Eye of Winter. Eye of Winter fires out projectiles that apply crit weakness to make enemies more likely to be critically hit, which then makes your Cast on Critical trigger more often, so on and so forth. Combine that with high crit chance with Tempest Spell for single target too, and you'd actually end up sucking out too much mana to sustain Ice Strike, so they even added a Sniper's Mark into the Cast on Crit just to reduce the frequency of Eye of Winter just a little bit and make it more sustainable while still generating extra power charges too. After that we have attribute stacking Acolyte of Chayula. Normally I avoid talking about similar build concepts between ascendancies, but as of this point I just haven't seen a build for this ascendancy that comes anywhere close to what a standard stat stacking build can do within Acolyte of Chayula, using things like Gemling does, Pillar of the Caged Gods, unique quarterstaff to scale attack speed and area of effect mostly, Hand of Wisdom and Action unique gloves to scale attack speed and flat lightning damage very, very effectively, and then the Astromentis amulet for just a massive pile of raw stats to scale those effects off of and then boost your setup entirely, then funneled through Tempest Flurry to convert the crazy attack speed this will generate into movement speed speed to get you around the place very quickly too. The main loss of this over the Gemling version is you have lower attribute scaling ability and less damage output potential as a result, but you have more comfort due to inherent mana leech that you can get from your ascendancy nodes, which shores up your main weak point of the setup for Gemling, and it still does more than enough damage to make it worth it regardless. Then after that we have the Infernalist, and I don't think my pick on this one is going to change unless balance changes or new crazy interactions are discovered, because this setup using barrier invocation to trigger ridiculous amounts of comets still just completely takes my breath away. The main interaction here is a combination of demon form constantly draining life, combined with infernal flame replacing your mana as part of the ascendancy nodes if you take that one, so if you overfill the bar you will damage yourself. This combined with barrier invocation, the monk spirit skill, generates energy when you take damage, funneled into comet as a spell, which can have a very high mana cost when summoned en masse, and this creates the potential for a completely self-sufficient setup whereby damaging yourself you fuel a ridiculous and consistent rain of comets without stopping. This clip specifically is from the build creator, showing a version of it that doesn't even use any uniques to begin with, though that's not to say it's necessarily easy to make, but it is something that is actually more doable than it may seem, as long as you are willing to use the spreadsheet that the creator made to help people properly work out their stats for it, as it is a very specific set of breakpoints you need to hit to make this function properly. Then finally, Blood Mage, and you know what it is, I know what it is, it's Temporalis and Choir of the Storm, the classic version, using Blink as well for high movement speed combined with Cast on Dodge as a meta skill that auto-casts slotted spells as you blink around the place. Stick in Spark with good crit chance, and watch Spark's crits trigger nearly infinite looping lightning bolt chains thanks to the interaction between Temporalis and Choir of the Storm. The thing is, this isn't looking like it'll receive changes anytime soon, unless the developers consider this interaction a bug, but I feel like they would have been a bit more upfront about it if so when they talked about their plans for balance on the stream yesterday. That just about does it for today then everyone, the current best builds for each ascendancy, and while some of them have sort of settled and gotten a bit more locked in with some ridiculously high power options being run, other ascendancies are still finding upgrades and ways to build more power with their nodes, which is always fun to follow and see how these things change over time, especially now knowing that the developers don't plan to massively change the state of top-end balance, at least not for a little bit. Hopefully you've enjoyed this then, and check out the original build creators if you want to know more about their build down below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.